next up is Sanjay Puri Architects, winners of the Production, Energy and Logistics category.
Good afternoon. Compared to the complex brief and locations of the earlier projects, this one is really very simple. And it's situated also in a very remote location where almost nobody goes to see it except the people who actually work here. So our client, unfortunately, in this case, is a cement production factory. And the Google image shows where the whole plant is. And towards the mouth of that plant is where we had to design an office which house their concrete laboratories and research labs with a little bit of administration area. The location of this site is in the heart of India, in the central part, where temperatures are in excess of 35 degrees Celsius for 9 to 10 months of the year, and January is the only month where it slightly dips down. So our site is 24,000 square meters, and is fairly large compared to the amount of built-up area that was required, which was only 8,100 square meters. So we looked at doing something that is low-rise, which should be done in 2 levels. And the resultant square, if you put in the facilities that were required by the client, fit in 63 by 63 meters. But when you do a square like this, the light penetration is only up to the extent of 8 meters, leaving the central portion without natural light. So we look back at traditional Indian courtyard architecture, where courtyards improve the spaces, they get in more natural indirect light into the internal spaces, and at the same time become cooler spaces to be used for community activities within the building. But what the courtyard also does is, these courtyards are not just in India, they are in Italy, they are in various places in the world. They offer very static views from wherever you are, within that square or within that rectangle. So we looked at translating the site itself, which is trapezoidal shape, and giving rise to a trapezoidal courtyard. What this does is, corresponds to the site, at the same time increases the north face by more than 3 times the size of the southern space. So the heat gain from the southern side is reduced drastically, and at the same time you get indirect sunlight through the north. And then looking at organic cities and the way multiple cities like this in the world are, where there is a narrow street that opens up slightly into a wider portion and then narrows back again, and each portion has its own identity within. We tweaked the courtyard further, bent it in portions so that you have a sense of intimacy in each part of the courtyard. What this also does is, in a ground plus 1 structure normally, when you have sunlight on top, at most times of the day, there'll only be 10 to 15% in shadow with 85% non-usable space. In this case, because of the intimacy and because of bringing the wings together, you have far more shaded spaces amounting to 40 to 50%. So whether it's the morning or the evening, you always have a shaded courtyard space that is substantial enough to be sitting in, talking, having a chat, or for whatever. So these are some of those organic cities that are there: Montenegro, Bar and Budva in Montenegro, Jaipur and Jaisalmer in Rajasthan in India. And then what this also does is it gives you a different perspective from wherever you are. So if you're in the northern corner, for example, you have a different view. If you're in the southeast corner, you have a different view. So every portion has an identity of its own. And then we've lifted the building up in certain parts based on the airflow, allowing natural ventilation to run through the courtyard all the time through the day. In addition to this, because as I mentioned earlier, Raipur is really hot. The temperatures are in excess of 35 degrees for 9 to 10 months of the year. We created an envelope of steel louvers all around the building, and each one of these, based on the angle of the building, are directionally towards the north, cutting out complete heat gain from the east, the west, and the south. This is the ground floor plan with research laboratories and concrete testing labs. And there are 3 focal points here. One is the entrance and an exhibition space, which is multi-purpose. And then on both extreme northeast and northwest corners are focal points, one a gymnasium area and one a cafeteria space. That's the first level plan, which has some more research labs as well as some administrative areas. And the cross section through the building shows how the open spaces and the enclosed spaces constantly vary as one moves through the building. So there's nothing that is repetitive, and every portion has something that is different in terms of the experience. So this is how one enters the building from the northern side. The central garden space, in a sense, opens up to the landscape space outside, and at the same time, the building kind of welcomes you inside simply by lifting itself up. And there's a complete connect visually between both landscape spaces, internal and external. This is the northeast corner with the gymnasium, with the corner twisted up and a shallow pond of water for passive cooling. The northern side, as it twists along, the external garden opening up to the internal one. And this is the northwest corner with the cafeteria, which is 6 meters high, again overlooking a shallow pond of water, which acts as passive cooling. So the building then appears very different from each side and is experienced differently from within as well. Here the clients, first when they asked us, they said the cement plant is almost operational and we need this building to be done really fast, so can you give us the drawings within a week's time? We said, please give us at least a month. And they couldn't understand why you need a month to make a building that is so simple, because the requirement was, we want X amount of research labs, we want X amount of concrete testing labs, this is what we've done, these are our 6 other plants, these are the plans. If you want, you can take a look at them. We just need a clean looking box where people work. I said, but finally there are 200 people going to be working here, so they should have an environment. And look at the location. The location is somewhere really in the middle of nowhere where nothing else. So it's really important to give something interesting in terms of the experience so that people enjoy their time working here. That's an aerial view of the courtyard space, how it bends in. You can see the building lifted up on the north, connecting both visually the outside landscape and the inside landscape. The landscape is kept very, very simple because we needed to have everything very low maintenance in this location. So these are internal views of the courtyard, and as one walks through, so it's very interesting to note that people, when they're using, they enter the building, they walk through this garden, and then they go to their offices. Nobody enters and goes straight up through the circulation spine, which is flanking the entrance on both sides. They prefer to walk down and go across. That's the cafeteria, which is 2 floors high, and it's got step seating on the sides, and this doubles as a community space for any kind of gathering that they need to have, or addressing something, or even watching a cricket match. Views from the cafeteria overlooking the outside. This is the multi-purpose exhibition hall space, and wherever you are in this building, you're walking past this courtyard. These are some of the internal laboratory spaces and administrative spaces within the building. All the louvers, as I mentioned earlier, are directed towards the north. So based on every single angle, which is different in the building, the louvers are differently angled with no heat gain from the south, east, or the west. All the bricks used were fly ash bricks, which is a byproduct. And cross ventilation is facilitated through all of these, and all those windows, even which are behind the fins, are all openable to allow fresh air to come in. So there is no need for air conditioning. The entire electrical energy on which this building runs is the residual energy of the cement plant. I know cement is not something that we are propagating, but in this case, the client was a cement plant, and by virtue of heat transfer, all the material that they're using to create the concrete, all of that energy is given back to the grid and then taken. So there is not a single watt of external energy used in this building. All the roof water is collected, recycled, and there's rainwater harvesting, and these are shallow ponds for the passive cooling. So these are kind of buildings that they were used to making, and which is why they did not understand why we needed a month to make the design drawings for this building. So we wanted to make a building, as I mentioned earlier, for these workers who are really in a remote location to at least enjoy the experience of being in a nice environment. Thank you very much.
I think this is not so fashionable conversation, which is that of the virtuoso piece, I would call it. I think that your building stands or falls upon the degree to which you have achieved a virtuoso piece. And you do something that's, I think, very fundamental and not often tackled by people very successfully, which is to deal almost purely with the quality of the figure. And you talk about the figure being related to sort of control over the light and sun and so on, which of course is interesting, but I think there's a little bit more to it than that, because what you built into the figure is its ability at the last moment suddenly to explode, to turn almost, you know, there's a commonality of the facade. There's one gambit. But then suddenly you allow the figure to take off and allow of another architecture to virtually appear. So I think these moves, I mean, they maybe sound a little abstract, or they sound a little bit architect's architecture, which people in the audience might find irritating even. I don't, personally. I'm delighted to see an example of it. But there is this moment in which what I call architect's architecture sets up certain questions for other architects who are so busy making everything sort of reasonable and, you know, ticking the boxes. And then a sort of frozen by a large site or an open site, or the possibility that you don't do lots of different things on the facade. You only once make it metamorphose. So I'm enjoying the whole performance. It is perhaps for the group of us to decide whether the virtuoso piece is a virtuoso piece or is aiming to be a virtuoso piece. Or maybe they have other, I mean, that's my view on it. The others may have other.
I'd just like to add one thing, that the budget for their earlier buildings was 33 euros per square foot, and we finished this in 36 euros per square foot, the architecture, interior, landscape, air conditioning, everything.
Goody.
Nice presentation, very simple building. As an engineer, a couple of things that struck me. You've got these cantilever ends, and I'm thinking, why? You know, the length and the shape of the building, where the building is formed, is quite functional, works really well. What's the purpose of the cantilevers? What do they contribute architecturally?
The whole idea was that you actually lift this up and create a complete sheltered space, so that it only happens in the gymnasium and the cafeteria, which are both community spaces for the building. So you get this sheltered space, it's looking upwards, and even that slope has inclined steps on, I mean, they have got steps on it, which are used like auditorium seating inside, so it doubles up as a place for congregation, for a lecture, for watching TV or whatever. So, and the cantilever looks very large here because it's taken from this mountain, but it's only 5 meters. And there's a complete back tie, so this is literally done without any great expense of steel or anything.
Okay, and could you just explain what was used for the cladding?
They are mild steel louvers.
Mild.
Mild steel aerofoil shaped louvers, which are hollow.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the presentation. I think I'm sort of conflicted about it, because I think in the end I think your degree of difficulty is really interesting. You know, we've seen projects that are incredibly complicated technically or urbanistically or from a regulation point of view, and I think your difficulty is probably one that's a lot more common, which is the desire to create a great piece of architecture out of a not very promising brief and client and site and everything. And so I think I really applaud you for all the moves that you made in such a short time, with the aim of, you know, improving the daily life of the people who are using the building in terms of climate and green space and natural ventilation. And so for that, all those things, I think I know all that came from you. You know, the client didn't particularly want it. And so I really applaud you for using your architectural tools to make a difference in this like remote corner of the world.
Thank you very much.
So thank you for your presentation. I think that this is a strange building, no? Because you explained very well that could be very simple one, like a building with a courtyard and etc. But then suddenly you start to produce some kind of, I would say, distortions or manipulations in the form that at the end you have produced something very, I think, interesting, because in fact it's a quite big building, but you never see that this is a big building. So you never see a long facade, you never see, in fact, at some point, try to be merged with the landscape. No? So we see more like a kind of tectonic movement, especially in the corners, but also in some of the images that you presented. The courtyard also is very strange. Seems from the pictures to be very small. In the picture from the courtyard seems to be very big. So you have been doing magic with all this project manipulation, manipulating the dimensions of things in order to create some kind of mysterious building. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.